Well, hello there. We have come to tell you the story of Alice Flagg. She is one of the most beloved ghosts in all of Georgetown County. Her story starts back in the 1850s when she was a 15-year-old. She was fairly carefree, knowing that in the next few years she would more than likely be betrothed to someone of her brother's and her mother's choosing. Alice didn't mind this at all until something happened that changed her life forever. She fell in love. She met a young man down on the Waccamaw River. He was loading lumber, they say, because he was of the lumber business, and Alice's family was of the rice business. That was the kind of family she was expected to marry into. Alice's brother Allard was a good bit older than her. He was a medical doctor, and he was also the manager of their family empire, their rice plantation. And he was pretty much overseeing Alice's growing up since their father had died. Her mother also, but Allard had the last say as the man of the house. Well, this young lumberman came to visit Alice. She was elated, but her brother Allard said, this is not a good idea. But still, Alice continued to see this young man until finally Allard put a stop to it. He said, "You're not going to see this young man anymore." Well, as it were, this young man had just given Alice a ring, a promise ring that meant that one day they'd be wed. She couldn't stop seeing him now. She was deeply in love, but she couldn't defy her brother either. So she took the ring off her finger and tied it around a pretty ribbon and put it around her neck and dropped the ribbon down inside her dress so that it hung next to her heart, the ring right beside her beating heart, the ring, the symbol of her love. If she were wearing a high neck dress, you couldn't even see the ribbon, and if you could see it, well, it was just a ribbon. She went along this way with the ribbon and the ring for quite a while, and she would see the young man away from prying eyes when she could slip away and meet with him. When she was alone in her room at night, she would take the ring off the ribbon and she would put it on her finger and imagine the days in the future when she would be a married woman. One evening, her brother Allard came into her room without knocking. He saw the ring on her finger. She tried to hide it, but he looked at her hand and he recognized that ring right away. It was the very ring he had told her to give back. He was furious. He put into an action then a plan that he already had been working on. He said, "Alice, go pack your trunk. I'm taking you to boarding school in Charleston." He had already been in contact with the boarding school mistress, and she was expecting to, in the near future, have Alice Flagg as a guest in her very strict boarding school way down in Charleston. The next morning, Alice was taken down there by Allard. It took them a long time to get there, but days later, when she was ensconced in the boarding school with all of her things packed and around in the room in her new temporary home, she still had that ribbon and the ring, and it gave her comfort. The fall turned into winter. The St. Cecilia balls came along. Alice was, as expected, fitted for a beautiful, long, white St. Cecilia ball gown. And she dutifully danced the night away in balls in Charleston, holiday galas, with young men that were appropriate, other young men of the rice planting genre that her brother and her mother would have approved of. But in her heart, she knew she was going to marry her young man. Well, the Christmas season came and went. The new year started. Alice began to wonder why she hadn't heard from her young man. The boarding school was very strict. No one came in or out without the boarding school mistress's approval or knowledge. No mail either. She knew it would have been difficult, but it seemed that somehow he could have gotten word to her. She began to feel despondent. She began to eat less. She wasn't sleeping well. And when the malarial mosquitoes of the spring began biting people in Charleston, young Alice was one of those who came down with the malaria. Now, Alice was a real person. So was her brother. Everyone in this story was. And Allard's daybook as a medical doctor is preserved in the South Carolina Historic Society down in Charleston. We know from reading that daybook that Alice had had malaria at least twice the year before, and her brother had treated her with opium. Her brother wasn't there with his opium now, and poor Alice grew worse until the boarding school mistress notified her brother that his sister was deathly ill, and he needed to come and see about her. And come and see about her he did. Allard made the long trip from Murrells Inlet, where the family lived, all the way down to Charleston. And then, instead of treating his young sister, he loaded her up and began the journey back up to Murrells Inlet. After this long and arduous journey, and Alice was ensconced in her own childhood bed in the Hermitage, their home there on the creek bank in Murrells Inlet, only then did Allard begin to seriously attend to her medical condition. He was checking for her pulse in that part of the neck where your pulse beats, and he noticed there was a ribbon. He pulled the ribbon up, and on the end of that ribbon was the ring, not just any ring, but that very same ring. He recognized it, the one he had told her to give back. He was furious. She still had it. He marched out to the creek with that ring in hand and flung it out into the water as far as it would go. It was gone, out of sight, out of mind, and poor Alice now was deathly ill. She was in what we'd call a coma. She was unconscious all during this time. When she awakened briefly, she did the first thing she had been doing for the last few months. She reached for the ribbon. It wasn't there. The ring. She was feeling all over her neck for the ring. Where could it be? In the bedclothes. The ring was gone. My ring! Have you seen my ring? Was the first thing Alice asked anyone who came to visit her. And many of the visitors were, because word had spread around Murrells Inlet and all through Georgetown County that poor Alice Flagg might not be long for this world. And she wasn't. She died, they say, asking for my ring. Have you seen my ring? Some say she was even pawing through her clothing and belongings in her drawers and her trunks when she passed into the next world. Alice was laid to rest temporarily under a bed of oyster shells overlaid with fragrant gardenia blossoms between their house, the Hermitage, and the creek bank in Murrells Inlet, until her mother could come down on that long journey from the mountains of North Carolina, where she, ironically, had gone to escape the malarial mosquitoes. When she was back at the home, Alice's body was laid to rest permanently in All Saints Waccamaw Episcopal Churchyard, not too far away from their home, several miles away in Old Polly's Island. Well, this is where Alice lays to rest to this very day. She is buried under a huge stone the size of a door that says only her first name, Alice. Down below that stone, she is still clothed in the St. Cecilia ball gown that she was buried in, the gown that she had danced the night away in Charleston, the gown that she had hoped might one day be her wedding dress. Alice has not been forgotten. There is no grass growing around her stone because so many people come to visit Alice. Now, Allard had her laid to rest in the Flagg part of the cemetery. All around are Flagg members of their family whose first name, last name, their birth date, and death date are carved in stone on their markers. He didn't want Alice to have this remembrance, but she's instead become the most remembered personage in all of Georgetown County. Allard, her brother, in fact, is only remembered in regards to his sister Alice. So many people come to visit her and walk around her stone. That is why the grass doesn't grow around it. The legend has been for many years that if you walk 7 times backwards around her stone, if you are wearing a ring, after the 7th time you'll feel a tug because Alice is still asking, my ring? Is that my ring? And Alice has also been seen walking in misty diaphanous form slowly along the creek bank in Murrells Inlet, where her old home, the Hermitage, was. searching the creek bank for her long-gone ring. And that is the story of Alice Flagg, where she lays to rest in old All Saints Waccamaw Episcopal Churchyard. She is not the only ghost. There are many of them. And we have a way now for you to make a ghost of your very own. And we'll go ahead and do that right now. For our ghost craft, to make a ghost like this that flutters in the breeze, you will need a toilet roll. You will need tissue paper, the kind that you wrap presents with. You will need invisible tape. You'll need scissors. And you will need fishing line. At the very end, you'll need a Sharpie or a marker. Now, the first thing we do is we want to cover up the toilet roll. You can also use a paper towel roll to make a bigger one, but this is a standard size tissue roll. And you need to cut a piece of the tissue the size of the toilet roll and then wrap it around it. Now, some of us might wonder, well, why couldn't we just leave some toilet tissue on the toilet roll? Toilet tissue will not take the mark of the Sharpie as well as this paper will. You need something you can write on. So what we'll do is we'll take our tape and we will tape the toilet paper to this. You can use glue, but I decided to use tape, and you might too. And then we tape the ends of the tissue paper. And now you have the top part of your ghost. You take some of the tissue paper to make the fluttering part. And it's up to you how much of the tissue paper you want to flutter. If you want a lot of fluttering, get a lot of paper. And what we do is we trim it. Trim, 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 all the way up to a couple of inches from the top. Don't cut it all the way off. And trim a little bit more. This is going to be a very, very fluttery ghost. One more trim, and we'll have all the fluttery parts done. Make sure they're all clipped about the same distance from the top. And now we have our fluttering pieces. And you can kind of pull them apart a little bit at the top so they flutter really good and really well. Now we put this inside here, but how are we going to make it stay? We're going to get some tape. And as we mentioned, you can use glue if you'd like. We'll get some tape and tape this inside so that it stays nice and firm. And you can tape it all the way around inside, but it will work just fine if you tape it just on one side. Just make sure you have it taped firmly inside. Now we have our fluttering ghost, and we want to make a face for him, like the face on the one over there. Now here's the time for you to get very creative to make the eyes on the ghost and the mouth. And you can give him eyes that are looking if you'd like, or you can give him eyes that are filled all the way in. It's up to you. But now we need to have a way to put him in the tree, and so he can flutter in the breeze or hanging from your porch or hanging in your house, because you want him to be able to flutter. So we cut some of the fishing line off, and we're going to tape it inside. Now, it tapes best if you can get a little bit more of the fishing line, bend it over, so that it's going to have a good bit of sticky in there. And make sure it's taped very well. Get the other end of it and bend it over so you have tape on 2 pieces of fishing line for a good hold. And then tape it inside here. And voila, you have a hanging ghost, a fluttering ghost. Now, you can hang it up somewhere in your house or outside and watch it flutter around. If you would like, you can attach it to a dowel rod or a pencil, and you can carry it around with you and flutter it all over the place. And there we have your ghost. Now, in old Georgetown County, there have been known to have been mermaid skeletons found along the shore, because we know mermaids are out there. We just rarely see them. One mermaid came ashore not of her own choosing back in 1893. She came ashore during the famous Flagg flood, a terrible hurricane that devastated all of Georgetown County. Let me tell you how this came to be. There was a mermaid offshore around Magnolia Beach, which is close to where Litchfield Beach is now. Now, back in these days, people didn't show much of their bodies. Their limbs, as they call our legs and our arms, were covered. And so they were when you went into the ocean to bathe, as they called what swimming or wading would have been. You would have a bathing house close to the water that you would change into your bathing costume. Sometimes people would bring food into the bathing house for a picnic, and such was the case in old Magnolia Beach with the Flagg family. Staying at the shore through September into early October, so as the malarial mosquitoes of the uplands and further back from the ocean wouldn't be bothering them and giving them the fever, they were staying at a house right on the ocean front and had a bathing house right up in the dunes close to the ocean, so they could put on their bathing costumes and get into the water without people seeing them in their bathing costume. On one occasion, they had taken for their afternoon repast and picnic some bread, some nice fresh bread, and it was forgotten that night, and it stayed in the bathing house all night. One of the Flagg family was walking down in the vicinity of the bathing house when he saw a mermaid at the high tide creep out of the water, and that they can do using their flippers in their tail. And she crept around the edge of the bathing house and she looked in. Now, mermaids are very curious about things that belong to humans because they're of the sea. This mermaid had smelled the fresh bread and she even took a bite of it. But then, hearing a sound in the dune, knowing somebody was walking back by, she made her way out to the water and was soon gone. Well, the next night was a little bit higher tide, and she almost was able to swim up to the bathing house, and this time she was enticed by what had been deliberately put there to draw her in, a fresh, new loaf of bread. Swimming up and creeping into the bathing house, she was enjoying the delicious bread when the door slammed. She was trapped in the bathing house. The mermaid was desperate. She didn't have anything with her of her own. She didn't know she'd be in this bathing house for more than a few minutes. The only thing she had was the storm ball that she kept with her on her person and carried around. Of all the things that she had found on the ocean floor that had belonged to humans, this was her very favorite. It had come from a shipwreck. It was a storm ball, as they called it then. We'd call it now a weather barometer. When the barometric pressure goes down, the water goes up. And that way you know a storm's coming. When the barometric pressure is low enough for a terrible storm, the water will start coming out of the spout. This was something, the only thing the mermaid had with her, and a good thing she did, because she knew now when a storm might appear. After days in the bathing house, she was with bated breath watching her storm ball every time the barometric pressure dropped and the water rose. When the water would drip out of the spout, she would hope and watch the ocean through the tiny cracks in the wooden bathing house, hoping that it would be a storm high enough to bring the water in for her to get out, if she could only get through that door. Now, the day after she was trapped in the bathing house, it had begun to rain. And now it had been raining nigh on 3 weeks. Not just a drizzling rain, but a steady rain. And this was the only water the mermaid had, was getting drops coming through the leak in the roof. Again, as it had doing many times in these 3 weeks, the water rose up through the spout, letting her know the barometric pressure was dropping and there was a storm coming, and she hoped with all her might this might be the storm that could be terrible enough to let her get free, break down the bathing house. The water rose up into the bathing house. She was still trapped by the door. The waves began to pound on the door and the walls of the bathing house, and one huge wave smashed the door. The water poured in. The mermaid forgot all about the storm ball, because now she was free. She whooshed out the door in the high water and swam out into the ocean. Now she was surrounded again in her home by the jellyfish and the octopi, because we know the plural of octopus is octopi. And she was home again. But back on land, things were becoming very, very serious. The Flagg family, who owned the bathing house and were staying in the summer home, even though it was September, they were still there up behind the dune. They had been warned by some of their servants that they needed to retreat to a Miss Hazel's house, who was a little bit further back. Miss Hazel had the highest house on all of Magnolia Beach, and she would have been happy to have them come in against the storm. But the Flagg family told their servants there was nothing to worry about. They would be fine. And this they believed until the water rose up into the bottom story of their home. At this point, it was too late to go in the deep valley between the dune and Miss Hazel's house. They were trapped. They went upstairs. The water wouldn't rise up there. It did. When they saw their belongings floating around and bricks off the chimney coming loose and the water was rising into the second floor, they climbed out the second floor window and got into a cedar tree. Not a fine live oak such as this, but a cedar tree, the closest tree growing to their house that they could reach. Every member of the Flagg family, more than half a dozen it was, clung in the cedar tree as the waves and the wind whipped them. Clinging in the cedar tree, one by one, the members of the Flagg family were pulled away by the raging water and wind, snatched away by the raging hurricane, all but one. Young Dr. Ward Flagg, the one member of the Flagg family, it is said, that was the person who trapped the mermaid deliberately in the bathing house, thus causing the Flagg flood that killed the rest of his family. Overwhelmed with guilt the rest of his life, Dr. Flagg, Dr. Ward Flagg, remained at the family's inland home, their Brook greenhouse. He lived there until the end of his days, which was a long, long life. He devoted his life, ever since the flood to his final days, to rendering medical assistance to those who could not afford it, and he never charged anything. In fact, there were 200 at his cemetery in the churchyard singing him on to heaven with their voices rising up through the live oak trees because he had rendered them medical assistance during their lifetime. Dr. Flagg rendered medical assistance to just about everyone who were descendants of the enslaved of Brook Green. Many of these were actual people themselves who had been enslaved and remembered those times. Some decades later, during the 1930s, some of them still remembered the Flagg flood, as it had come to be called, and they told about the mermaid who had been entrapped in the old Flagg's bathing house. Two of them had actually seen, and it is documented, they saw her creeping out of the ocean, walking on her tail awkwardly. They described her beautiful scales and said she had a prettier face than any white woman you'd ever see. These are documented sightings of the mermaid that are in the archives in the libraries now from the federal work projects. The mermaid is still out there. Many mermaids are out there with the jellyfish and the octopi. And now we are going to show how we can make our own jellyfish that would be out there with the mermaids. For your ghostly jellyfish craft, you will need, first of all, a shower cap. You will need some bubble wrap. You will need some ribbon. You will need another kind of ribbon, the curly ribbon. Curl swirls, I believe these are called. And let's see. You will need scissors, and you will need some invisible tape. Aha! It's good to have all your things together when you start your craft. Now let's open up this shower cap. Here we go. It's amazing how much a shower cap looks like a jellyfish. Here's our shower cap. Now we need some bubble wrap to fluff out the shower cap. You won't need a whole lot of bubble wrap, just enough to fill up your shower cap. You don't want it to be too full, so you can kind of gauge how much you need in there. Oh, it's looking like a jellyfish more all the time. That looks like about enough. And you cut your bubble wrap off. Now you've got your jellyfish base. Now let's start with the ribbon. We need a lot of ribbon, and it's up to you how much ribbon you would like to have on your jellyfish. I ended up with 21 long strings of 3 different lengths. So we'll start cutting them. The first ones will be about this long. And we'll just cut one after another of the same length. It'll take you a few minutes to get these cut, but once you're done, they're really, really pretty. Now this is the third one. And they don't have to be exactly the same length, but it does look pretty if you have several graduated lengths of about the same length. Okay, there. Let's see. We'll need one more. There. Now we have 5 long strings. Now we need 5 short strings or ribbons. Not real short, just a little bit, like about a third of to the top of the other string. About a third the length of the other ribbon. And you might end up dropping some of the ribbons, but you can always pick them back up. Just make sure all the tops are together. Now, we have 5 short ribbons, but we need something in between. We need 5 medium ribbons. So let's cut some of them. This goes about medium length down. Three, 4, and 5. Be careful to hold on to all your ribbons now. Now we've got them all, and we tie them together at the top to make sure all your ribbons stay together. One really good knot should do it. There. Now we've got all your ribbons tied together. Now you've kind of pulled your knot out like this, not just to strengthen your knot, but to fluff out your ribbons so they don't all hang straight down. Now, we need to stick your ribbons in here. They'll stick really well to the packing stuff. The bubble wrap is really sticky. It's hard to get tape off bubble wrap. So when you tape it down, it's going to be there really well. Now we need to tape some of our curly swirls. The curly swirl has a pre-stick in it. You'll want to use that if your curl has it. Plus you want to tape it down too, so it'll stick really well. So we'll stick this curly swirl down, and then we'll get our colorful curly swirl. And you can use any color you like. When you see jellyfish, usually they're kind of like an invisible or beige or white color, but there's also beautiful colors. Sometimes they're bright blue. And we'll stick this down here and add some tape to it. And we'll stick the last curly swirl down. Oh, there's 2 more curly swirls. A little more to the body of the jellyfish. Now, when we see jellyfish washed up on the beach, a lot of times just what we see is the top part, the body. But when they're out in the ocean and they're swimming free with the mermaids, all these long tentacles are hanging down. And that's what we're trying to show in the ghostly jellyfish that we're making. Add a little bit of tape. Now we have all the body of the jellyfish on the bottom, and we don't want it to fall out when you turn the jellyfish over. So we'll grab the end of the shower cap and bunch it together and tape it firmly so that it's not going to come apart and dump your jellyfish tentacles on the ground. The tape is invisible, so it's not going to show. And the other end of the jellyfish, we need to do that too. So you'll have all of your tentacles in the middle. So we'll tape your shower cap jellyfish body shut. Try not to get any ribbons under your tape. It's easy to happen. There now. And test your jellyfish. Make sure that nothing's falling out the bottom because it's going to be swinging in the breeze. That looks pretty good. Now, something invisible to hang your jellyfish. Let's find that fishing line again. Decide how long you want your jellyfish to be hanging from. And we'll get our fishing line, and we're going to tie it together at the end. There. A good knot. And then we're going to make sure our knot holds and put a piece of tape right across it. Sometimes you can even reinforce your knot. It's better to reinforce it than to have your jellyfish fall. There now. We'll put a piece of tape across it. And tape this securely right on the middle of the top of the jellyfish. And there you have your own ghostly jellyfish. You can tweak it around and move the ribbons and tentacles so that they are just like you want them. So your ghostly jellyfish will be ready for Halloween.